to the place where singles shine, celebrating life, divine by design, faith and love, we intertwine. Route 77 with your journey's prime.
Welcome to the Route 77 podcast. Today, we're exploring the profound symbolism of marriage. We'll look at why God established it, what it means for husbands and wives, and why it's a temporary institution meant for this life only. Marriage is far more than a cultural tradition or a piece of paper. It's a reflection of Christ and the church. Whether you're single, married, or somewhere in between, we believe this episode will offer meaningful insights into what marriage truly represents. Let's begin. Welcome to the Route 77 podcast. I am your host, Natasha, and I am here with Monique.
Hello.
I know we just did a 3-part series about marriage, but I think it's good to have more of an in-depth dive into this specific topic.
What it isn't.
Yeah, what is marriage and why it's why it was created, what it means now and what it means for the future, and what it means for a person who may never experience it. What does that mean for them? What does that mean for a woman? And what does that mean for a man as well? There's different roles. What does it mean again for people who aren't married or may never get married or are currently not married and things? So, yeah.
All right.
So marriage, what is it?
It's two people who go up before a person who says, do you, for better or for worse, rich or poor, and
I do at the end. Right?
right. And then they sign this piece of paper, and then they're together for as long as they feel like they need to be until they don't like each other anymore, then they can get a divorce.
Yeah.
Is that it?
That's what people think. I think too, a lot of people say, I don't need to get married. It's just a piece of paper.
And what does that piece of paper really signify?
And really, if you don't have a deeper understanding of marriage
And commitment.
then you don't, it is just a piece of paper.
Yep.
It's just checking a box in your relationship, and it really means nothing. That's what it's like. So should that be what it is for a Christian? Should it just be a piece of paper? Were they even pieces of paper way back then? Because I think the government has taken over a lot of the jobs of what the church did and was meant to do. And really, is the government the one who should be the one that's in charge of this?
I wonder when that happened.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Let me investigate while you continue on the talk.
Okay. So we see marriage coming in, or like this thing of two becoming one, coming in right at the very beginning with Adam and Eve. Adam was alone. God saw that it was not good that he was alone and created Eve to be his helpmate. And he created the first standard of what a marriage is: one man, one woman. And they each had equal yet complementary roles, equal but different. And it says in Ephesians 5:31-32, for this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. This is a profound mystery, but I am talking about Christ and the church. I think a lot of times we forget what the whole purpose of marriage was. Like, why did God create marriage? Is marriage necessary to have children? We see it all the time. We don't need to have marriage for children. Do we need to have marriage to have a romantic relationship? And even a fulfilling one for some people. Do we need a marriage to raise children? There's nothing, you can raise children and not be married. So it's not like you need it biologically, scientifically. There's a lot of sociological studies that have been done that show solid marriage and can be a healthier place and things like that. But I'm just more meaning where did it all begin? All of a sudden, just if people think about it, just one day they were instead of just boinking and making babies, they all of a sudden were we should make this official. And then they started making marriage documents. It's a
On that note, I have that information.
Okay.
Marriage certificates began to be recorded in the late 1800s and early 1900s as part of civil registration of births, marriages, and deaths. The exact timing varies by location, but here are some examples. Nova Scotia, mandatory civil registration of marriage began in 1864, but compliance was not universal until the early 20th century. England and Wales, civil registration of marriage began on July 1st, 1837. Massachusetts, marriage licenses have been required since 1639. So before the widespread use of marriage certificates, marriage was often a private contract between two families. In the 16th century, Christian churches would accept a couple's declarations of marriage as valid even if there were no witnesses. So there you have it.
Good. Yep. So it's a relatively new thing
Mm-hmm.
to have that. But like I was saying, like we see marriage as a thing. A lot of cultures have this idea embedded within them of a man and a woman becoming a family.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't actually see like marriage certificates for everywhere per se. But it just let me try my find my place here. So it but there's this sort of ideal that it doesn't biologically or scientifically make sense in a way like my dog is not fixed and he would boink anything that came within reach of him for a female and make babies all over the place and not look back type of thing.
We're not dogs.
No, but I'm just saying it doesn't, that's the way nature is. We don't go, oh, that dog should marry that dog, even though there's some people who do, but that's a whole other conversation.
I've actually seen those wedding ceremonies.
But
Not
what I mean is,
person-
if Zeus goes and breeds a female, which he has planned, and then he goes and breeds another female, he's not cheating on the one.
No.
And people don't go, oh my word, what a horrible dog. He's cheating on his
spouse.
We don't
Wouldn't that be the mama of his first babies?
right?
Oh,
But if you look at it, we don't think those things about the animals. We're not
I'm sorry. I want your dog to breed with my dog.
because monogamy for the dog.
Fixed.
even when people make them marry like that, the animals have zero interest in that. Like they might like each other because they get on as animals do sometimes, but they don't go, now we're married.
Or marry another woman ever again.
Yeah, like all they see is like treats and people
We're just
petting
gonna get
them
him
and
some
saying
concubines.
they're getting all their magic. They
We'll
have
build 'em a
whatever
harem.
wearing. They're like, what? Yeah. So I know this is going weird, but if you think about it, as a human person, you could go out, and there are men who do this, make
And women.
babies and women or have multiple baby daddies because they choose to. I saw this one woman on TikTok, she has like 12 babies and they have a different baby daddy, every single one of them. And there's men that go out and have babies. So yeah, you might, but we look down on that of a person. You say like, how could they do that? Why would they do that? Why? And yet we have it built into us that this isn't the way it should be.
Right.
And we try really hard. Some of them try really hard. Right now, polyamory is a big thing. So having more than one romantic partner within a relationship. So having like thruples, like I talked up last time, 3 people. Yeah, or more. Or
That's
having,
just a weird word.
yeah, it's the new word.
It's a new.
But there's also like open relationships where they're allowed to have like other people. Anyway, there's a lot of debate on whether that's really appropriate. But it doesn't make sense that there should be a marriage in a sense. If you think of us just as evolutionary beings that evolved over time, there's no God, there's no purpose, then what is the point of marriage? Like, why do we even have a thing about monogamy? And we see it, like I said, in a bunch of different cultures around the world, not just, oh, it's a British thing or a North American thing, or like you see it.
Yeah, it's a Western thing.
Some of these religions, but again, it's a lot of times it's because the religion or the culture will allow for it. And yet we still look at it. Wait, that's a little bit, and they don't say multiple husbands, which is also a whole other topic too. It's not because they have 15 husbands for one woman. It's usually the guy who has a bunch of wives.
Yeah.
So that's a whole other reasoning.
The guy is the sexual being.
Yeah. And so if they're pregnant or menstruating, you don't want to be able to not have sex without,
Yeah. So you've got to have that backup plan.
Yeah, and there's a purpose behind it. God created man and woman. God created them for each other in a romantic way, in a sexual way. He didn't make Adam and Eve just to be good friends. That wouldn't populate the world very well.
I was wondering where you're going with that. What?
It doesn't mean
Aren't
they
they
weren't friends, but they weren't just, hey, buddy,
Hey,
and
buddy,
that's it.
we're supposed to have kids. Ew, with you?
Yeah, you're like my brother. Genesis 2:24. Okay. And that's again, we talked about the Ephesians one, and then it's actually referring to the Genesis 2:24, which says, therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. Which is very interesting because at this point, they didn't have a father and mother on a human sense. So God set this into place before there was even more children for them to leave their father and mother. And
So he already knew.
and that was before the fall. So God created it before the fall, not as a reaction to the fall. They were created to be a complement to one another and to have a unity
Hmm.
that really reflects God and his unity. Like God wishes to be a part of the marriage. It's the husband and the wife and God. So that's a triune sort of relationship. And it creates, so that's just like how God is the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit all in one. It just reflects, it's not an exact copy, but it's a reflection of his relationship within himself that God is one, and yet three, the marriage is one, and yet two, if you want to say it's just a husband and wife. They're two human persons who become one human person, but are still two human persons.
Yeah,
It's,
because the two will become one flesh.
yeah.
Yeah.
And then in Ephesians, it said this is like a mystery. It is
Yeah.
a mystery of what it is.
In Christ.
And once we have the fall happen soon after this, and marriage also shows God's grace and redemption. God's relationship with Israel is often described as a marriage covenant. And we see this through the prophet Hosea, who's told to marry a prostitute.
It was supposed to portray how Israel was acting.
Israel. And just so you know, it we meant Israel as a whole, not just the women of Israel. The men were considered that too, in the sense of that Hosea, the prophet, was faithful to his wife, and his wife was not. She had children by other men. She ran off to be with other men. He had to buy her out of slavery, and he
Just
remained
exactly
faithful.
what God does with us and what God was doing with Israel over and over again.
Yeah.
You just read the Old Testament and you will see how we are
And
like that.
it's got me. I was listening to some podcasts again, like I try to do before I do these, just to
Yep.
get people's perspectives. And this one guy was talking about how in his church, this was like, I don't know, down the state somewhere, but he said there's this big burly guy, and he said he was afraid of his wife. And he's like, how are you afraid of your wife? You're such a big guy. But he says when she gets angry, she would come at him with her sharp nails, and she'd be clawing at him, and then she'd be sitting there trying to kick him in between the legs and all this type of stuff. And he's trying to keep himself protected and stuff. And then the pastor was just thinking in his head, that's what we try to do to Jesus. And yeah, that wasn't a healthy relationship, and there's stuff, but
Yep.
actually there's, how many times do we think we're such good people? How many times were we Hosea's wife,
Kicking
Gomer,
and
or attacking
yeah.
Jesus, and then Jesus as the husband to the church still takes us back and
Yeah.
buys us out of slavery. And
it's not like we're literally clawing or kicking and stuff like that. It's the things that we willfully do as sinners. We know we're not doing the right thing. We feel it deep in our bones, but we do it anyways. And that's
and we
like,
say that we love Jesus and that he's in our heart and that we want him to lead and we want to do this and we want to do that. And then
we
we
turn
fight
around.
kicking and screaming half the time, or
Yeah.
more than half the time, probably a lot of the time.
Or we're horrible to the people around us, which is a reflection of how we treat him. Yeah.
So we're just saying Christ in the church, the symbol of Christ is the bridegroom. And so he is the one who the men represent in the marriage.
So do you want me to read the whole of Ephesians, or do you just want me to read that 25
you
first?
read what you feel like you want.
Because I think you've got the whole of it right to 27. That way we can break it all down so we get it all in context. Wives, submit yourselves. So this is Ephesians 5:22 to 27. So I'm going to read the whole thing because then you get the perspective of both husband and wife, and we'll break it down. Wives, submit yourselves to your own husbands as you do to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church, his body, of which he is the Savior. Now, as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit to their husbands in everything. love your wives, just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her to make her holy, cleansing her by the washing with water through the word, and to present her to himself as a radiant church without stain or wrinkle or any other blemish, but holy and blameless.
Okay.
There's more there. In this same way, husbands ought to love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. After all, no one ever hated their own body, but they feed and care for their body just as Christ does the church. For we are
Good.
all members of the church.
Yeah. I want to talk about both of them because I know we're going to talk about both of them almost together.
Yeah.
Because the first thing that comes up is says wives are called to submit to their husbands. And there's the S word that every woman wants to like.
I know this is what turns us into claws.
Yeah, rawr, submit. I shall not submit. I'm a woman, and this is misogyny. This is misogyny. This is like the patriarchy trying to push the women down, and it's so frustrating because you're like, and then there's always the but what ifs. What if he's abusive? What if he's this? What if he's that? What if he's everything else? Okay. What we're saying about a marriage is more of a healthy marriage or one that can be made healthy if you're both trying for it.
Right.
If you're in an abusive marriage, get out of abusive marriage. That will always be our take on that. Yep. It is not your job to fix the other person. Yep. If they've abused you, you can get out. Yep. You have biblical reason for divorce. Yep. And it's God and other people's job to deal with them.
Yep. Not yours.
In the future. Not yours. Okay?
Yeah.
So we're just putting that out there.
You are not the savior of him. Or her, because sometimes it's the other way around.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's our first thing.
Yeah.
Okay. When we're, as women, we're called to submit to our husbands. We see this. I always find it interesting how we see it in such a bad way with that word. And yet we always submit in our entire lives. We're submitting to people all over the place. Yep. We're submitting to government. We're submitting to traffic laws. We're submitting to your boss at work. We're submitting to the elders in our church. We're submitting ourselves all over the place. But as soon as it's to your husband.
That's the funny thing is that they always, and this is why I find it very interesting that we started at this verse, because if we go one verse before that, it says, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ.
We learn to submit to one another even. And even we might even be okay with that.
Yeah.
And say, yeah, we'll submit to one another, but submit to my husband?
Nope. I am the boss and he must listen to me.
He can't.
And there's some guys who will actually say that's true.
Yeah. But then there's people say that we're supposed to be equal and that's not submission. And you're like, no, that you are equal. Just like Adam and Eve, they were equal, yet different roles. And they had a different, they complemented one another with how they were supposed to do things. And I always find it interesting that women are like, do you realize like how much responsibility is laid on that man? Like they are supposed to live up to what Jesus was. Like they're representing Jesus in this marriage. And they are supposed to love as Christ loved. Like how did Christ love? He told the disciples to stop keeping the kids from him. He told them to stop telling the women off who were coming to wash his feet or to pour oil on him or just to have the women around him. He told them off to stop telling the lepers to go away he wanted everybody to be near him so that he could help them. He lifted up children. He lifted up women. And he died on the cross for everyone.
Yep.
So he did not do anything for himself. He came from heaven to earth as a baby, as a human being, experiencing all the things that we have to experience in life, from infancy to a man in his 30s. He was always with people. He had people trying to kill him all the time and people trying to just deny who he was all the time. And yet through it all, he didn't even agree with Peter when Peter tried to stand up for him when he was being arrested. Like he said, nope, put your swords down. This is the time. And so I don't think there's any Christian who would ever balk at the word submit to Jesus. Men, you're called to this. You don't magically become this when you say I do. This is something you're called to as a man. And you may or may not get married. You may be married for a time. You don't know. But you're called to love, sacrificially, selflessly, and sanctifyingly to your wife. And I don't see how submitting to a man who is called to that is is a bad thing.
Right.
Because again, submitting doesn't mean less human.
Nope.
It doesn't mean less rights. It just means there's a head. Just like your company has a CEO, there is somebody who has to make the final call on things. But then it trickles down. Yeah, you may not have the final say of everything, but man, he's got a lot of responsibility before God. If he doesn't live up to his responsibility, and as a husband, that is like Christ, like he is the first one God's coming to and being like, "Hey, why were you not sacrificial and loving and selfless?" So you have that responsibility for God. I don't know, would you like God coming to you like that? That's why it says like teachers as well and pastors, they have that responsibility as well. Like God will come to them first in a sense because you're the one in charge, so to speak. So if the husband is the one that God's put at the head, the in charge one, that one's supposed to be like Jesus, that's a hard shoes to fill, sandals to fill.
I'm trying to find actual kind of things about that talk about what submit is and what it isn't. This person says what it isn't, just like it is not reticence, servanthood, inferiority, docile, degrading, and not a sign of weakness. In fact, submission in marriage is a sign of strength, not of weakness. It requires a great degree of personal strength of character. Submission in marriage is a spirit of respect a wife has toward her husband. It is an attitude intended to help her and her husband to live a more contentful, peaceful life together.
And it's not inferior.
No.
It's just a different role. That's all. And I'm pretty sure if you
Well-
have a husband who is living like Christ, he's going to ask your opinion. He's going to put great weight on that opinion. He's going to listen to you when you have things that say that are in your wheelhouse. That is a person. They're not just going to
She's not a
trample
silent.
elevate.
Yeah, she's not a silent yes person.
No, like I remember one podcaster saying like God didn't create woman to be a doormat.
Mm.
Like it was never about that.
No.
And like Jesus never treated a person, any person, let alone a woman, poorly.
Yeah.
He didn't degrade them. He didn't do anything negative
No.
to them.
And if you love your husband, it's easy for a woman to love. We are made to love. That's how we end up nurturing our children.
Respect is the hard part for women.
Yeah, yeah. So by choosing to support her husband like this, she is empowering him to have self-respect, which is something that men need. Men are like it says, like men love your wives. They're not very good at that. Normally, respect. They do the respect thing hand over
Awesome.
fist. Yep. That's them. I
Yeah.
found was very interesting.
Yeah, because it says wives respect your husbands and men love your wives, because they're not telling it the other way around, because women are better at loving than respecting, and men are better at respecting than loving. It's just the
Because
natural
God
way
doesn't
of
know
things.
us at all.
He didn't create us or anything.
Nope.
So marriage reflects Jesus and the church.
Mhm.
And Jesus died for the church.
And if you look at it, Jesus himself submitted to the will of the Father.
Because
Because
he asked, if this cup can go from me, then take it. If not, then your will be done.
Yep.
And he submitted to
And
the
he
Father.
was not a weak person. I don't know about you, but there's no way I could have handled what he did. I would have whips, Jane hit me. No, I'm good. I'm out of here. I am a ouch. No.
And I just like wanted people to see, like, when you're a woman, like, you don't become a wife the day you say I do, in the sense of all of a sudden you unlock a new level and you have all these abilities like you do in a video game. You're like, oh, you've reached level marriage, we'll unlock submission. And it's just, no, again, submission doesn't mean less.
Mm-mm.
But you can show submission in the appropriate places when you're not married, which is like originally to your family, to your parents.
Yeah.
Then you have your bosses, your teachers, your government, your like I mean in the sense of like
The
you obey the rules, obey the laws, you don't murder people, you try not to speed, things like that.
yeah.
But even like you submit to these things willingly, but you can do it. But it doesn't mean like in your church, when you submit to the authority in the church, the pastors and elders, it doesn't mean that they make
Lord
all
it
the
over
rules
you.
and don't listen to you. Like if you say, hey, like, why did you do this? Or why did you say this? Or hey, I think we should do this. What do you think about this ministry? Like a good church will listen to them. Maybe there's reasons why they can't do it, but they listen to it. If you're gifted in a certain thing or your expertise in a certain thing, people will listen to you.
I actually, while you were talking, I was like, oh, hey, I have a really good analogy. I'm in the choir. Pastor Jason is the choir director. I don't know how many times we have gone, we're singing and we're trying to, and then he stops us and he says, who is the leader of this thing? It's not you. It's me. So you need to follow who? You? No, me. So we have to submit as a choir, we have to submit to his authority because he's the director, he is leading us. Now I am wanting to try out for a solo part. I have to submit my will of wanting this part, the authority of Pastor Jason, because he's the one who knows the best person for this part. It may be me. It may not be me. And if it's not me, I have to accept that. It may hurt. But that's something that I've had to tell myself, this is a big thing. I haven't sung a solo part since just before I caught COVID in, what was it, 22? Was
Something
that
like that, yeah.
something like that? Because that whole year I was sick. And then I kept getting lung infections and I couldn't, and I was always sick. Every time choir came around, I got sick. And then with Amber being in the hospital and I couldn't do and then I got sick again. And this is the first time that I have not caught an illness at the end of November, beginning of December. Lord willing, I will not get sick. And I'm doing everything I can to keep myself healthy. But even still, that's no guarantee.
No.
I have to submit my will to the director because he's the one who knows, not me.
And I just find it interesting. We will willingly do that.
Yeah.
We'll willingly put ourselves into submissive roles, left and center, until they say submit to your husband.
Yep. Yep.
And fight it tooth and nail.
Yep.
And in any of the instances that you submit to anyone else, an authority or whatever, that never it may in some countries, but it generally never makes you less of a person.
No.
You're not worth less
No.
than the person you're submitting to. You're not inferior to the other person as a person. You might be an inferior chess player if you're trying to join a chess club and you're not great at it. But as a person, as a human person, I am not worth less because you choose to submit yourself to something, or you don't always choose to submit yourself to things that you happen to be in. You don't choose to be born. You don't choose to be born in a certain country. You might
or to a certain family.
So you have submission that you may choose to throw off at some point for whatever reason. But generally, we're submitting left and center, men and women.
Yep.
Every single person we're submitting in some way or another. Even if it's merely submitting to the laws of the nation, say you're the prime minister or the president, you may be the top of the food chain when it comes to power in your country, but they still have to submit to the laws of the country. And
unless you're TJ, your parent. I didn't throw that in there.
But then there are other countries that sort of just make up their own laws as they go along if they come into power. So, I mean, you see how well that goes.
Yes. And the chaos. When you don't believe in submitting yourself to any kind of higher authority because you think you are the higher authority, chaos ensues.
It never brings a good thing.
No, We see that happening in Gaza. We see that happening in Africa. We see that happening in Haiti. All these places where there's chaos. In Canada, we are experiencing it ourselves. Yeah, like the riot that just happened on Friday night in Montreal. What is happening to our country?
And people think they don't need to submit to
Nope.
the land laws of the land, and
Nope.
that they can
Do
burn
whatever they
things or
want.
hurt people and things like
Yeah.
that. So we see what happens when we throw off submission to something that
Yeah.
is good.
Yeah.
So throwing off submission to a husband is not
A bad thing.
it is a bad thing if you throw it off.
Yeah.
But submission itself
And
is
it's
not
a
a bad
bad
thing.
thing if he is one of those kind of men who is an authoritarian who will lord it over you.
Get out.
Yeah.
But if the
That's
husband,
not what we're talking about.
no, we're not talking about abuse. We're talking about
Healthy.
marriage, or one that can be made healthy provided the two of you work together. But if the husband throws off the submission that he is supposed to have to God and says he's the highest authority, that's when you have the problems.
Yeah.
Because he's no longer submitting to God as Jesus submitted to the Father. The church, the husband represents Jesus, so he submitted to the Father. So the husband is to submit to God.
The church submits to Christ.
Church submits to Christ. The wife submits to her husband. And it doesn't mean that
The children
you're
submit to their
less.
parents.
Yeah, like it works its way down.
It works its way down.
Again, but then the mother and then the father submit to God ultimately. So there's always that. It's always like a trickle down of submission. So just because you go, why shouldn't the man submit to the wife? It's no, the man's submitting to God. So he's busy submitting already.
Yeah. I don't know about you, but he has a greater responsibility because he has to answer to God for how he treats his wife.
Yeah. And he actually answers for his entire family.
Yeah.
Like for his wife, for his children. Like he's the first one that God goes to essentially as responsibility.
Just like in the Garden of Eden, when Adam and Eve sinned, the first person God spoke to was Adam. He says, "Where are you?" Not because he didn't know where Adam was, because he knew exactly where Adam was, but he wanted Adam to know where he was himself. He wanted Adam to take responsibility for what he'd done. But Adam just passed the buck.
Yeah.
Yep.
Threw Eve under the bus.
Threw Eve under the bus.
Who then threw the snake under the bus.
Yep.
Yeah. But anyway,
Adam blamed Eve. Eve blamed the snake. The snake didn't have a leg to stand on.
I
was waiting for that.
Waiting
it
for
never
that one to come in.
happened.
Finally got in.
I finally got it in.
Even as we see, like, husband and wife, Jesus and the church, bridegroom and bride, we also see that the covenant of marriage represents the covenant that God has with his children.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the promise, because basically the bridegroom has yet to come. He's on his way to be married, to bring the church to fullness. And there's a promise that that God will always be there. He will hold up his end of the covenant. Everything that he has promised will come to pass. And so that is what Jesus is to the church. That's why they have Hosea marrying this prostitute. He was told over and over by God to go and get her, to keep her as keep her as your partner, keep her as your wife. Because God, no matter what we do as a church, he calls those to him who are wicked, and he sanctifies them. And we are justified and sanctified through Christ, not because we can somehow all of a sudden be this great marriage partner. We keep trying to kick him in between the legs. And he just keeps taking it back.
Does Hosea ever win her back completely?
I don't know if she ever loved him at all. I don't know.
It wasn't like that story from Francine Rivers, hey?
No. It just kind of went into a lot of profit after that. But it's just because you see Israel like turning away, constantly. God keeping his promises and brings through salvation Jesus, because he kept this irregardless of the fact that they turned away, they ran to other gods, they did everything like this and this, and they're like, oh, you mean do this and this? Like they would literally do every single thing. They actually had a checklist almost like of all the things that God said not to do, and see if they could check it all off. And I don't think as a human nature we're not really any different.
No.
And
We're just as quick to run away. You can't catch me.
right. So we see Jesus leading, we see God promising and saying, there's no way, like, there's nothing you can do that can take you from me. And so we're seeing how that is like he created the marriage to create that reflection of what was an amazing relationship. What is a amazing relationship?
And that kind of grace isn't a license to keep doing bad things,
No.
because that kind of grace is supposed to enact change in us. So if you're not, it's not cheap grace. It's grace that came at a cost. Yeah.
So then we see that marriage, like marriage is only a symbol. We've talked about
Right.
it before. It's a symbol, it's a representation of Christ and the church, the bridegroom and the bride, of God and his promises, which then we see in Matthew 22, in heaven there will be no marriage. The union of Christ and the church is fully realized at that point. Because it says like that in heaven there'll be no marriage or giving in marriage.
Mm-hmm.
Because again, like I said in other podcasts, if you symbolize something, you don't need a symbol when the actual thing is there.
Right.
Like there's no purpose of it. Would you need the symbol of the cross if Jesus was standing right there?
You won't need it because he's right there. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a symbol of representation of something.
Yeah. It's like a shadow, and the shadow gives way to reality.
Yeah, and
Because we don't sit there and go, oh, look at that beautiful shadow. That is the reality. No, it's not.
you can see it's a reflection of
It's
something.
a
Or it's
reflection
like
of something. Yeah.
And so we sit there and we go, we make our lives so much about marriage. Like we're
Mhm.
like, I have to get married. I'm not complete if I'm not married. All this type of stuff. And yeah, marriage is a good thing. We're just talking about how it's like a representation and it's such a good thing that God has created to be a
Mhm.
good thing. But we make it such a big deal. If we don't have this, then how are we even human almost? Like they almost ask these questions. And yet it's fleeting
Yep.
in the sense of it's only for here and now. And then you get to the other end where eternity starts, and then you're probably thinking, why did I make that such a big deal of my life? Everything in my life revolved around it. I
Mhm.
spent 10 years of my life wishing I had it and being in a depression. 10 years of my life in a bad one,
Yeah.
a bad marriage.
Or I got married, and then a year later, disease took my spouse,
Mhm.
or an accident or something. This world is so temporary. It's like the flower. One day it's beautiful, the next day it's all faded away.
Mhm. Well,
So,
imagine, I don't know if this is you can tell me if this is a good analogy.
okay,
Imagine you had a gift card for a store that you really
okay.
and you're super excited that you got the gift card. Just like, I've got this gift card, you keep it in your wallet. You're like, I can't wait to get to use this gift card. And you go and you use the gift card and now it's empty. Are you now still super excited about that gift card?
No, because you've got the actual thing you
You've got
wanted.
the actual thing. So you just take the gift card, you toss it out because this was a representation of something that was to come. Then you got the thing that was to come. And now you don't sit there and you're like, hey, look what I got for my birthday 3 years ago. There's nothing on it, but look what I got. You would be like, what the heck?
Why are you carrying around a dead gift
An
card?
empty gift card.
I've carried around gift cards that I've used up, like at Tim
Mostly
Hortons.
because I don't know if there's anything left on them.
I go,
But as soon
I'm
as
not sure if there's anything on here. You want to check?
But as soon as they check and they're like, no, they're like, you want me to throw it out? And we're
Just
like,
throw it
no,
away.
it's my beautiful gift card that represents what I used to have on it. Like,
Yeah, that's good. That's a good analogy.
so I just think like we sit there and we're like, look at this marriage. We have this marriage. We're like this, but are we really going into marriage thinking about what it represents? I feel like for me anyway, most of the time when we go into marriage, it's about
Me.
I need to find somebody that I love and that I can have sex with and that I can have children with and that I can be happy with and they can make me feel happy. And even if I can try to make them feel happy, like we can all get along. Like there's barely any God in this at all, I feel. We always had the holy part that says, I'll only marry somebody if God tells me to. Or I feel like God's calling us to marry.
Yeah.
And you're like, that's pretty much the only part of God that fits into our marriage thoughts.
But you have to be careful with that one. That guy over there, that's the one God told me to marry. And that guy's kind of going, no, no, no. Oh, no.
Yeah. Or they're married, and have even
Or
had
they're
that
married.
before where they're like,
Yes. And
that's
I've heard
crazy.
that. They're married with this person and they go, I don't believe that you're the person that I was supposed to have married in the first place, because this person I should have married instead. So we need to get a divorce because you're not the one God told me I should be married to.
Or they said that God was told them to have a divorce, and it's just, you need to go back to your scripture and see if that was really God talking.
Yes. Yes. Because no, that was not God talking. That
Yeah.
was your selfish emotions telling you that that this isn't good enough for you. You want something better. And
So
you
when
want
we
to know
look at
something? The grass on the other side, once you're on the other side, is the same color
same
as the
color.
grass on this side.
Yeah.
It's
And
not
sometimes
different.
there's pee marks. But if we look at marriage of what it actually is,
Mhm.
then I think we can actually look at the verse that says God hates divorce.
Yep.
And actually understand it better.
Because
Because everybody just likes to say God just hates divorce because it's like, but we look at it like you have to stay together because God hates divorce. And it's not actually understanding like what God hates about divorce. It's not that you two can't get along. It's not that you are getting at an abusive relationship. It's none of those things. It's saying, look at this representation I've made. Jesus and the church. Like there is no anything that will cause Jesus to divorce his bride.
right,
The thought of that, it's just not even in what they could conceivably do.
right.
Okay. It is Christ and the church. So when you take that and you just put through divorce, like that's why it's such a big deal.
Yes.
Because you're saying
That
like,
Christ isn't good enough for you.
yeah, or that there's a possibility that Christ could be like, you know what, forget this.
People, those are the people who deconstruct.
Yeah.
Yeah. They have
And I
pretty
just,
much divorced themselves from Christ.
yeah. And did I blow your mind?
Yes.
But I just think because we always like to think of it like God's trying to keep me in this loveless marriage, or he just wants us to like, oh, that's it, you're with the person. You're like, hey, you're supposed to be like a representation of Christ and the church. Instead of saying, oh, we've just fallen out of love. Wow, that would be an amazing concept if Jesus said that.
Yep.
That he all of a sudden fell out of love with the church. Again, abuse, get out.
Yep.
That's a complete different story. We're
Different
talking
story.
about, again, healthy or potentially healthy marriages. Ones where people work together and realize what it is that they're making the representation. When you get married, it's not like, again, there's not enough thought of why we get married.
No, no. We get
It's
married
just
because
about,
we think the other person is supposed to do everything in their power to make me happy. So you're not getting married because of anything other than your own selfish.
or even just because of each other.
Yeah.
Like there's no God involved at all.
It's
You
our
might,
chemistry. We
yeah.
just send off so many sparks.
And you might reference God and feel like God's calling you to get married, like you're both believers and everything. But I would say that largely there's a lot of hormones going through your body. There's a lot of endorphins and positive, happy feelings, which is God given. That's fine. But you actually don't, like, people don't take marriage as seriously as they should. To true, especially as a Christian, because you realize what you are doing. You are mimicking the symbol of Christ and the church. You are mimicking to show this symbol to the world of what Christ and the church is. I think we should be getting married with more gravitas than we do.
And what does that word mean?
More seriousness,
Yeah.
more. It doesn't mean you have
Intentionality.
like you actually truly understand what marriage is. And it's not just two people who love each other so they can boink.
Let's get down to the brass
Hey,
tacks
I'm pretty
here.
sure that's 90% of people's thoughts at the beginning
Yeah.
when they first get married.
I just want you.
Yeah. There's a lot of that, and God did create all that within it. That's
Yes.
beautiful part of marriage.
It's
and
healthy
that's
and it's
fine.
normal and all that good kind of stuff. There's nothing wrong
But the
with it. Don't
problem
get
is
us
we're
wrong.
not actually going into it like with the gravity it deserves.
Right.
When you say your vows, you feel like you mean it in the moment. But do you think that's the way Jesus would act? I felt like I was going to die for you, But when it actually came to it and it was hard, forget it. Like, where would we be now if he was like that? Things are getting tough now. Maybe I just want out and I'm just going to divorce you guys, the church.
Yeah. So I just can't deal with you guys anymore. You don't listen to me. You do your own thing. You're making up all this stuff. I just can't with you anymore. So here's my letter of divorce.
And that's the most scary thing to think about,
right?
Isn't it?
It is.
We are, as Christians, sinful people with sinful hearts, and we are no better than Gomer the prostitute.
Yep.
And yet we treat Jesus like she did with Hosea, where, they're just going to keep taking you back, and it doesn't matter what you do, and you can go off and find other people and find other religion or find other things, and you think it's going to be this, that, and the other thing. And Jesus, to those who are saved, takes them back every single time. And Hosea, from even the biblical divorce things that we use in the church today, had a million reasons to divorce his wife. But God, everything legitimate. She was sleeping with other men. She had children by other men. She ran away to be with her lover. And he could have just said, forget it. But God wanted him to be a symbol. And he calls all of the husbands and wives to be a symbol of this. And I think we just need to we need to understand that before we start making the vows.
Yes.
That we need to be able to understand that when we're making these vows, these are not...
Did you do a close-up? You wonder, what are you smiling?
What are you smiling at? So, yeah.
The cat. He's under the
cat.
carpet. He's literally under the carpet. Go ahead.
So, yeah.
Sorry.
That's okay.
I couldn't resist because it was comical, and all
there.
I could see was his nose sticking out. You can't see me. I'm hiding.
So I think when we get married, we have to take it more seriously.
Mm-hmm.
If or when we get married.
Yeah.
We have to understand, as a Christian, what God is calling us to do in that marriage. And it's not about making babies. It's not about being a husband and wife in a sense of just being there for each other.
Yep. Compatibility is a good thing. But you're more than that.
We are called to be light to the world, and people who are married, Christians who are married, are being called to be that
even more
symbol, even more so in the sense that you're being called to a higher calling, but like a higher level of accountability, because you're now representing Christ in the church.
Yeah.
Do you understand that when they do come out with numbers, and again, there's arguments of whether this is real or not, but how even the divorce rate within the church is almost negligible, equal to those who are outside the church. Do you see now maybe how discouraging,
why would I want to go to church when it's no different from the world?
And what does that represent to the world of Christ and his love for the church?
Yeah.
And so I think all the things that come with marriage, the love, the emotional feelings, the longer term feelings, the children, the enjoyment of being with the person you love, the one another, the companionship, all the wonderful
growing
things
old together.
That is all God gives and gifts within marriage.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you're also gaining, like, those gifts come with a big level of responsibility.
Yep. Not just to the community around you, but also to the children that you raise and to the families that you represent. Yeah.
And I feel like, there's just not enough seriousness when it comes to Christians who get married.
No.
Because they see it as a piece of paper.
A means to an end.
It's literally just a piece of paper in a church. Like, basically it's just, they just add that extra, I don't know, panache to it by it's being like, we're Christians and we're getting married, instead of actually understanding we're actually agreeing to be a representation of this higher truth. Are we ready for this?
Yep.
Are we seriously thinking about what we're doing?
Yep.
And then when things start to get tough, are you now thinking about what you're going to do to this symbol that God has given you to represent? And again, does not count Abuse.
No, no. Because there are going to be some mornings that you're going to wake up and you're going to look at your spouse and go, I married that? Why did I do that?
I was listening to this podcast and they were talking about a study that was done. And I think they asked like, a bunch of, I don't know what the number was, a lot of people who had been married, I think more than 15 years. If they could do it again, would they marry the same person? And I think it was between 70 and 80% said no. They wouldn't have married that person.
Wow. I know I wouldn't, but I have very valid reasons.
Yeah. Again, abuse is a different
Abuse is a different story.
story.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
But wow, they married for that amount of time and they wouldn't have.
if they could go back and do it again, they wouldn't.
Wow.
And you see what kind of relationship that has now developed into, because maybe they didn't get a divorce because they were like, we're Christians, we're not supposed to divorce.
And we've got children and
There's always a reason.
yeah.
Instead of being like, hey, we're a symbol of Christ in the church. We
Where
better
where did we go sideways and let's
Yeah.
come back
and
to
work at this.
Yeah.
Because this is a symbol to the world.
Yeah. So if you are married and you find yourself in that kind of a situation where you're just not sure that you want to continue in this relationship, it's not a bad relationship. It's just not a good relationship anymore. Counseling. See your pastor. Talk to your pastor. Talk to a
There's
counselor.
a lot of really good counselors out there, Christian counselors.
Yeah, who can help you work through like how you got to where you were, where you have all of a sudden found yourself living with a stranger.
And
Anyway.
you need to come to terms with the fact that you are part of the problem.
Yeah.
Again,
it's
not abuse. Not abuse.
No, not abuse. Just where you've all of a sudden, he's off working and you're raising the kids and you never talk to each other anymore. And you sleep in the same bed, but you got your backs to each other.
And you think, if only they would change this and this, we'd have a good marriage.
Yeah.
And I'm sure the thing is, they have the same list about you.
Yeah.
So instead, you cannot change the other person.
Nope.
But if you instead, again, step back and say, hey, wait, this is a symbol to the world. I am called to be a light to the world, reflecting Jesus. We're literally living the reflection of Christ in the church.
Yep.
We have to get off of our butts and actually be the witness that God has called us to be.
Yeah. Marriage is a commitment.
And it requires
Love
humility.
Is work. You have to choose it. Every day you have to choose it, because if you go by your emotions, up, down, you're sick, you've woke up on the wrong side of the bed, whatever, you can't go by those. You, once upon a time, stood at an altar looking at your spouse in the eyes with love and admiration. Where did it go wrong? Where did it go south? When did you stop having that love for your spouse? So this is where you need to not give up on it, because that kind of a reason is not a reason.
And it takes a lot of humility.
Yep. If there's no abuse, if there's no infidelity, and if there's no addictions, because we don't want to discount that, because there is all sorts of kind of drugs, alcohol, pornography. As long as there's none of that kind of thing going on in your relationship, then it can be redeemed.
Even within that, some of those can be redeemed.
Some of those can be. But it's hard.
It's not a requirement. If the person has been sinned against in those ways, they are not required to stay.
No.
We're not saying
those
you can work through. You can work through technically through God, through Christ, infidelity.
Yeah.
You can work through addiction.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean you have to.
No. And a lot of times you might have to have a temporary separation in order for those addictions to be worked on properly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if there's like infidelity, that's going to cause a lot of healing that needs to happen.
A lot of trust issues are going to be.
Yeah. But I don't want people to see it like, I've got my get out of marriage free card. But if you honestly are like, nope, that's it. Like, then the other person that's in that is no leg to stand on. They can't be like, oh, but we're a symbol of Christ. It's like you turned Christ into a.
Yeah. But if your spouse says, and actually does something to do something about those there is that opportunity.
But it is definitely a case by case, and a lot of other people should be involved, in the sense of people that have objectively critical things to be able to say to you.
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
can help give you advice.
Yeah. Because one of the pitfalls of being in a relationship with somebody, especially somebody who has addictions, is becoming codependent, where you are so focused on getting that person fixed that you lose sense of your own self. And
Mhm.
that's not healthy either. That might be another podcast.
Mhm. Lots of them.
Codependency and addictions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah. So we've been talking about this for a long time, but I
Yes.
think it was just I think it'll be well cut out, but I just really wanted to talk about it and understand like what people are so focused on, that they want to find that other person, they want to fall in love, they want to get married, have children.
Mhm.
These are all good things, but are you really understanding what marriage is meant to be?
Take it from Hebrews 13. Let marriage be held in honor among all.
Yeah. If
Yeah.
we just make it a laughing stock, oh, it's a Christian getting married. What's the difference?
Yeah.
Instead of, wow, why is this marriage like this? And then they see it as like,
Yeah.
then and when they hear things like Jesus is the bridegroom, the church is the bride, like it actually is a positive thing.
Yeah.
Anyway, we'll leave it at that.
Yeah.
Hopefully we didn't get too heavy or scare people away, but I think it's,
I think
it's,
it's good though, because we talk a lot about singleness, and they probably wonder, what are our views on marriage? Marriage is a good thing. It is a good thing. And if you find a good spouse, it is a good thing. But don't take it lightly, and don't take it for granted.
and don't make it the be all and end all of
Mhm.
everything. So
Don't
anyway.
hold it as an idolatry either.
No, exactly.
Be careful of
Been
that.
there, done that.
Don't do that.
Don't
Yeah.
do it again.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you all for listening. I hope you will like, subscribe, or comment on our podcast. Leave a review. That would be awesome. The more reviews that we have, the more
Yep.
people that can find us through the algorithms.
Yep.
And
If you like on the video, it will generate more traffic for us as well. So you just hit the like button.
yep, hit subscribe or
Yep.
just like
Or
never
just
miss
like,
an episode.
never miss an episode. It's
Yeah.
just us. We're
Yep.
humble. We hope we're humble enough to say we are just wanting to reach out to people.
Yeah. We just
Yeah.
want people to place they feel they have hope in their singleness.
Yeah. Yeah.
And everything. Yeah. So you can find us online at route77.ca, or you can find us at any of the social medias, the basic social medias, and TikTok even. We're on there some, and YouTube. So we're all over the place now. We're starting to get more and more places.
Yep.
As I broaden my social media
Horizons.
horizons. There's so many things, and I'm like, I don't even understand half of it. I don't want to, but it's the way things are going.
It's all good.
I've hit that age.
There you go.
Old people age.
Is
I
that
can't
us?
believe these young people with their Facebooks and Insta snaps.
It's just snaps. What the heck? Weirdo.
Yes. I hope you all have an enjoyable day, and we'll see you all here next time.
Bye for now. I'm actually thinking of TikTok. Bye.
Thank you for spending time with us on the Route 77 podcast. We hope today's episode has helped you see marriage in a new light, as a beautiful representation of Christ's relationship with the church. Whether you're single or married, we can all find hope in God's perfect love and faithfulness.